Good morning, everyone. I'm Keith Patridge, the president of McAllen Economic Development Corporation and the McAllen Foreign Trade Zone. On behalf of the MEDC board and management team, it is our pleasure to welcome you to the fourth MEDC USMCA update entitled What Matters Now. Since the USMCA entered into force on July 1st, 2020, it has been our pleasure to sponsor these updates to help each of you have a better understanding of the USMCA's potential impact on your business. From the beginning, we've called on Mr. Jorge Torres, the president of Interlink Trade Services, to use his extensive international trade expertise to boil down the most important provisions, changes, or disputes arising under the USMCA and share the possible impact on the current ever-changing global trade environment you all are facing every day. However, in today's update, we're also pleased to announce that Jorge will be joined in the presentation by Flor Torres of CIC Trade and Customs Services, who will supplement Jorge's presentation with a more detailed update on the current USMCA related issues impacting Mexico business operations. We hope you find today's USMCA update to be informative and helpful as you continue to negotiate a very fluid international trade environment. We would like to hear your feedback on today's presentation and suggestions for other trade issues you would like us to touch on in the future. You can send your comments to me at keith@mcallenedc.org. Thank you for your participation in today's update. And now, without further delay, let me turn it over to Jorge Torres with Interlink Trade Services. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Keith, for the introduction. And thank you again for allowing us to do this webinar. Like Keith said, this is a series of webinars that we've been doing since the inception of USMCA. This is our fourth webinar. And in this webinar, we're gonna provide some updates regarding USMCA, but we're also gonna talk about other issues, including a Mexican customs issue that Flor Torres from CIC will talk about the creation of the new Mexican Customs Agency. So that's going to be a very interesting topic as well. As an agenda, we have the update, like I mentioned. We're going to mention some things that we have previously mentioned in the past. Also, the impact on cross-border trade. Some issues on the implementation of USMCA, the supply chain disruption and the impact on trade, the current administration trade policy, and at the end, summary and conclusions. After my presentation, Flor will do her presentation, and we're hoping to have 10-15 minutes for some Q&A. If we cannot answer the questions, you can forward them to the MEDC, McAllen Economic Development Corporation, so that we can try to answer as many as we can. As a refresher, again, the USMCA, it was signed by the three presidents of the Prime Minister and the two presidents of Mexico, US, and Canada on November 30th, 2018. And then a revised agreement was signed on December 10th, 2019. On the US side, the agreement was ratified by Congress on December 19, 2019, and then the US Senate on January 16, 2020. And then President Trump signed the agreement on January 29, 2020, for its implementation in July 1st, 2020. There was no gradual transition. NAFTA ended on June 30th, 2020, and the USMCA began on July 1st, 2020. Again, it was started on July 1st, 2020. So far, no major issues from an operational standpoint have been encountered Obviously, there are other issues that we're going to talk about, but overall, the implementation went very smooth. Some technical information regarding the changes with compared to NAFTA from USMCA. The rules of origin are now under General Note 11 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States. The NAFTA rules of origin are under General Note 12. So there was a new note, General Note 11 was added to the tariff schedule. The program indicator, which means the indicator that provides the green light to claim USMCA preferential treatment on imports to the United States. It's now the letter S or S plus for certain products, agricultural products. With NAFTA, it was MX or Canada or CA. Now it's just an S. The regulations, the US Customs regulations for USMCA are now under Code Federal Regulations 19-182 and NAFTA USMCA, compared to NAFTA USMCA regulations 19 CFR 181. Something that is very interesting is that the NAFTA marking rules under 19 CFR 102 will still apply under USMCA. And as a matter of fact, these marking rules are currently being reviewed for its application for non-preferential treatment as well for US and Canada only. So we're still waiting for customs to update on that matter, but it will probably allow non-preferential treatment qualification for marking purposes for Canadian and Mexican products. Also, the USMCA does have a sunset provision. In 6 years from 2020 on 2026, there's going to be a revision, and then they're going to see if they extend it or not. USMCA, it's valid for 16 years. And on the 6th year, they're going to see if they extend it for another 16 years. So it can be valid for up to 32 years. But this is something new. So we have terms. With NAFTA, there were no terms. So therefore, it wasn't until USMCA was implemented that NAFTA ended. Now, with USMCA, we do have deadlines and expiration dates. So 16 years, on the 6th year, they're going to review if they extend it for another 16 years. So it will be up to 32 years. NAFTA had an official certification format, the NAFTA Certificate of Origin. With the USMCA, there's no official certification format. It just has to contain 9 data elements. One of the major changes in the USMCA, and I'm going to talk more about it in detail, is that the automotive rules of origin have been revamped in pretty much, brand new rules of origin. And that's creating some issues, which we're going to talk about later. Also, the de minimis rule or the minimis duty-free shipment thresholds increase, meaning that there's no formal transaction or customs entry required if the shipment is valued $117 in Mexico, $50 Canadian dollars in Canada, and $800 in the US. We're going to talk a little bit about the e-commerce and the minimis later on as how it's impacting e-commerce in other areas. And here in this slide, we have some links to the final text of the agreement, the Implementation Act, the public law, the interim implementation instructions, the Customs webpage where they have a lot of information on USMCA. And also the uniform regulations were published on June 30th. Those are available as well. And the 19 CFR 182, that's a working process. So they're still adding parts for those regulation provisions. And obviously General Note 11. So these are good tools for you to research USMCA in more detail. So that's you can go to these links and these publications for further reference. Now, how is USMCA impacting our cross-border trade? Well, obviously, we had the pandemic in 2020. So that kind of impacted overall trade. So, USMCA started during the pandemic year. Some of us thought that it was going to be postponed till later, but no, they decided just to go ahead and start it. So as far as trade data is concerned, 2020 was impacted overall. But in 2021, we did see an increase in trade with the economic growth that we're having globally and in our region. So that's something that we're still encountering. So we're going back, as far as the trade volumes are concerned, we're going back to pre-pandemic numbers and with the growth that we're having. So we're going to see that continue. So USMCA continues to contribute to that. But something that is very interesting, it's I wanted to put here the top 3 US trading partners in 2021. And these 3 partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, have been the top 3 for many years. Sometimes China's up, sometimes Canada's up, but overall, those are the 3 top trading partners with the US. Right now, for 2021, Canada is the #1 trading partner. Exports, we exported to Canada $307.6 billion. We imported more, obviously $357.2, with a total trade of $664.8 billion. So that's 14.5% of the total global trade. Mexico is in second place. We exported to Mexico $276.5 billion. We imported from Mexico $384.7 billion for the total trade of $661.2 billion, and percentage of total global trade 14.4%. Look at China. We exported $151.1 billion, but we imported $506.4 billion for a total trade of 657.4, and percentage of total trade, global trade 14.3. Something very interesting here, all 3 countries are in the 14% range of global trade percentage in the US. But in China, look at the exports. Our exports are very limited, but our imports are much, much bigger than from Canada and Mexico. And this is interesting because even with the Section 301 tariffs and other things going on with China, we still imported a lot of goods from China. So the impact of Section 301 tariffs seem not to have a major impact in this. And we're going to talk more about this later, okay? Continue with some trade statistics. In the United States, the total import value of goods for fiscal year 2020, it was $2.4 trillion, but in 2021, we went up to 2.8 trillion. So as you can see, we did have an increase, and that's based on the economic recovery. So there's an increase in trade. And this is for my custom broker friends and other entities that understand some of the customs terms. The entry summaries, obviously, those are the customs transactions that are processed to import goods into the United States. Fiscal year 2020, there were 32.8 million customs transactions for entry summaries filed. And in 2021, it went up to 36.9 million transactions. So again, this reflects the growth with the economic growth, and also USMCA having an impact here. Something, again, going back to the de minimis, again, imports under $800 are allowed to be cleared with a very simple process. And customs created the type 86 entry, which allows transactions or goods to be imported if they're less than $800 through an expedited manner. That's impacting e-commerce tremendously, because a lot of the shipments coming from e-commerce sales, it's through de minimis, through Section 321, meaning that you order online from Amazon and from other entities. And I'm pretty sure when you order from Amazon, you've seen the packages arrive, and you see they're coming from China and other countries. Well, most of those shipments are being cleared under Section 321 de minimis, which is $800 or less, type 86 entry. So if you look at fiscal year 2020, we have 636 million transactions done under Section 321 de minimis. And in 2021, it went up to 771.5 million transactions. This obviously, it's as we continue to buy online and our purchasing patterns are changing, the consumer purchasing, this is set to continue increase as the years go by. Obviously, this is a challenge for U.S. Customs because it's saturating the system for that Customs uses to clear shipments. So as custom brokers and importing entities, we have seen some delays in the ACE software. Some of those delays have been attributed to the increase in Section 321 transactions. As far as collections are concerned regarding duties, taxes, and fees, in 2020, Customs collected in the United States $74.4 billion in duties and taxes, and in fiscal year 2021, $93.73 billion. The fiscal year for Customs is from October 1st through September 30th. So this reflects activity up to September 30th, 2021. Section 201 duty assessments, as you know, when President Trump was in office, he implemented some trade measures, and one of them is Section 201, which is for washing machines and washing machine parts and solar panels under Section 201. As of February 14, 2022, these duty assessments for washing machines had year to date have collected almost $285 million in duty assessments. Washing machine parts, $3.1 million in assessments. But look at solar panels, $2.8 billion in duty assessments. And as you know, the solar panel industry is very interesting to watch with all these issues going on with China and Section 201 and Section 301, et cetera. So this is some of the breakdowns on collections. And then Section 232, obviously, we also had the issue with aluminum and steel products being imported to the United States. Again, as far as collections are concerned, aluminum duty assessments under Section 232 up to the 14th of February of this year, $2.9 billion, and steel, $10 billion. But look at Section 301, which is the big one. It's the Section 301 tariffs on Chinese products. So far, as of February 14, we have collected $127.9 billion in those duties for Section 301. Also, there were some Section 301 tariffs implemented for European Union goods, $1.1 billion. So that's how it's impacting. So besides the regular collection of duties and taxes, which here 93.73 billion, look at the collection over here, $127 billion, $27.9 billion. So again, there's a lot of debate going on in Section 301. We're going to talk more about it later on. So that's some numbers, some statistics as far as the impact of trade that we're having recently. Now let's get into some more concrete and detailed information. Like I mentioned to you, the USMCA really revamped the automotive rules of origin in a big way. Here's a summary of the three major impacts that we have. One of them is the USMCA now has a regional value content of 75% versus 62.5% under NAFTA that the vehicle has to contain from North America, meaning US, Canada, or Mexico. So the value of a vehicle, 75% of its value has to come from US, Mexico, or Canada. And it's including components and labor. Also, they have different content rules or thresholds for core, principal, and complementary parts. So there is a set of regional value content requirements for certain components, which it's making things a little bit more complicated to understand and to apply, because besides having the vehicle content, we have specific content requirements for components now, and they divided them into core, principal, and complementary parts. On top of that, we now have a requirement for steel and aluminum, which at least 70% of a producer's steel and aluminum purchases must originate in North America. This is brand new. We had the regional value content requirements under NAFTA. Again, they increased, and now they have the parts as well. But now we also have the 70% content for aluminum and steel. And the other one that is more challenging is the labor value content requirement. Now it is required that certain percentage of a qualifying vehicle, 40 to 45%, depending if it's a passenger car, light truck, light duty truck, or a heavy truck, they have to have content that is produced by employees making an average of $16 per hour. So obviously here, the burden of proof relies on the OEM, on the assembly, on the car assembly company, but they're gonna go and require certain component suppliers to comply with this as well. So what does this mean? Well, this is something that, in my opinion, Trump really fought for, because if you see the labor rate, maybe Canada can meet this. The United States, obviously, we're close to that, but Mexico, we know that the labor in Mexico, it's cheaper. So for them to comply with this means that as far as OEM is concerned, the assembly of vehicles, this is to pressure OEMs to assemble vehicles in the United States and just source certain components from other countries. So this is a big challenge that OEMs are having to meet this requirement. We're still evaluating what's going to happen, but these are the three main components that the automotive and automotive parts rules of origin have, which are currently being evaluated and debated. Okay, and talking about debating, well, we already have a dispute, okay? There's a dispute on the interpretation of the USMCA auto rules. This dispute, they try to resolve it, but there was no success on this. And the conflict focuses on how to calculate the percentage of a vehicle that comes collectively from the three countries under the USMCA Mexico-Canada agreement. This might be a little technical, so bear with me. If you're not understanding, that's fine. It took me a while to understand, but I'm going to try to explain it the best way possible. The U.S. insists on a stricter way than Mexico and Canada believe they agreed for counting the origin of super core parts, table 8.2, which I'm going to show in the next slide, which includes engines, transmissions, and steering systems in the overall calculation, which makes it harder for plants in Mexico and Canada to meet the new threshold of 75% regional value content. For example, if a super core part uses 75% regional content and thus qualifies under the requirement for duty-free treatment under its individual rule, those super core parts, the rule says that they have to be 75% regional content, meaning labor and overhead and materials. So if they meet that individually, supposedly they can qualify as originating. And obviously Mexico and Canada are arguing that USMCA allows them to round up the number to 100% for purposes of meeting a secondary broader requirement for the entire vehicle. So what Mexico and Canada are arguing is that, okay, if I meet that 75%, that means that my part is originating. So in all purposes, for all practical purposes, it is 100% made in Mexico or Canada. The US, however, does not want to permit rounding up or roll up, making it tougher to reach the duty-free threshold for the complete vehicle. So they're saying, no, it's we're gonna go to the actual percentage, and that's, that has to be applied to the vehicle as well. So as of now, automotive assembly plants located in the US can comply with the original content requirement if it were to be applied as the US interpreted. And here are some of the components for table A2, engines and head blocks and transmission and all the components, body and chassis, axles, suspension system, steering systems, the advanced battery. So column one is the main part, and then the components of the engine. So if you're making an engine in Mexico and you're bringing headlocks and crankshafts, and so as long as 75% of those components are from Mexico or US or Canada, you're going to meet that requirement. But the US saying no, they have to be 100%. So that's where the conflict is. Making the USMCA rule of origin too complex could cause automakers to not qualify for preferential treatment and instead pay the general duty rate of 2.5% that is applied in the US for automobiles and 25% for light trucks. And paying these general duty rates will make the USMCA relevant for preferential treatment purposes. Motor vehicles are the top manufactured product traded between US, Mexico, and Canada. So like I mentioned, there's a dispute. The Mexican government and the Canadian government brought it to the attention to the US Trade Representative. And on August 20th, the Mexican government officially submitted a consultation request to the US Trade Representative as per Article 31.4 of the USMCA to resolve this difference. It was not resolved, so on January 6, 2022, Mexico requested the establishment of a USMCA panel to resolve this difference in interpretation. So now they're following the processes in place to resolve those matters under USMCA. So we should expect a decision on this around September 2022. In talking to some attorneys and reading some articles on this, they say that Mexico and Canada more than likely will prevail because, I think the US went too far in the interpretation. So in essence, the interpretation of Mexico and Canada will stand, which in a way will be good because it will allow, good for Mexico and Canada, obviously, because it will allow qualification of those core components to be easier. So we'll see what happens later on this year regarding this matter. And because of this, I think the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, they're accepting through March 28 of this year, comments on the automotive provisions of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. So yeah, they're saying, wait a minute, I think the rules are too complex. Let's review them in a way. So they're they're accepting comments up to March of the 28th of this month so that they can report this to the Senate Finance Committee and House and Ways and Means Committees by July 1st, 2022. Obviously, they're reviewing the rules of origin, steel requirements, the staging, alternative, because also what they did in the USMCA for the automotive rules is they are giving extra time to OEMs to meet these rules. If they apply, it can justify because of supply chain issues, etc. So they're giving it until 2025 to comply with these requirements. But again, as you can see, they're more complicated, more complex than they were under NAFTA. So now they are providing an opportunity for the industry to provide comments on these requirements. And the comments, they can be regarding the overall operation of the USMCA with respect to automotive goods, actions taken by the automotive and parts producers to demonstrate compliance with the USMCA rules of origin, the use of the alternative staging regime, enforcement of those rules, including the alternative staging regimes, the automotive certification process for steel, aluminum content, labor value content, and RVC, regional value content. Again, these three requirements that we discussed earlier, there's a process to certify customs how companies are complying with these. So there's an enforcement area on this. Whether the current rules are effective and relevant, this is pretty interesting. Whether the current rules are effective and relevant in light of the new technology and changes in content, production processes, and character of the automotive goods, and any other topics relevant to the trade of automotive goods under USMCA. USMCA, took a few years to be negotiated. And again, in the automotive sector, there are very strict provisions, more complicated provisions. And we're seeing the industry, the automotive industry, advancing or evolving. And as we know, we're going to the EVs, to the electrical vehicles. So maybe the rules now need to be adapted to be more flexible regarding the new technologies. but we'll see. I mean, we'll see how this evolves. But it is very interesting to see that the automotive provisions in USMCA were radically changed, and now they're being challenged. And I think they're going to be evolving and modified to accommodate current and future needs in the automotive industry. Okay. Now let's switch to labor. That's another area that it's been very interesting. It's something that USMCA put in place in more strict manners, in more detailed manners. So Chapter 23 of the USMCA covers the labor provisions, and among its provisions of this chapter, it requires that the parties adopt and maintain a law and in practice labor rights as recognized by the International Labor Organization to effectively enforce its labor laws and not to waiver or derogate from its labor laws. Include new provisions that require the parties to take measures to prohibit the importation of goods produced by forced labor. We're going to talk about forced labor at the end, which is something that you have to be very careful and analyze your suppliers and supply chains. To address violence against workers exercising their labor rights, to address sex-based discrimination in the workplace, and to ensure that migrant workers are protected under labor law. So again, labor is a big thing for USMCA, labor rights, worker rights, discrimination issues, not only sex discrimination, but also women and children, et cetera, religious, et cetera. So this is something that was put in place with USMCA. It also includes an annex on worker representation and collective bargaining in Mexico. And this is something that it's creating some issues. It has been put to test, as we're going to see, under which Mexico commits to specific legislative actions to provide for the effective recognition of the right to collectively bargain, will allow for workers to engage in real collective bargaining, and will require companies in Mexico to abide by the same basic labor principles that companies in the US do. So they're trying to harmonize the processes. To fulfill this commitment, Mexico enacted historic labor reforms and is implementing transformational changes to its labor regime, including new independent institutions for registering unions and collective bargaining agreements and new impartial labor courts to adjudicate disputes. As you know, as of 2018, there's a new president in Mexico from Morena, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and he's promoting what they call the fourth transformation. And obviously this is a more populistic government, and in its core, it has obviously helping labor rights and people with low economic possibilities. So this is part of their strategy as a transformation continues with Mexico. The labor chapter language designated to the U.S. Department of Labor as the point of contact for addressing matters related to the agreement. So the U.S. Department of Labor can enforce and monitor certain labor provisions in Mexico. And they did this by implementing the Interagency Labor Committee for Monitoring and Enforcing, which is co-chaired by the Department of Labor and the Office of the United States Representative, to coordinate efforts with respect to implementation and maintenance of the USMCA labor obligations, to monitor Mexico's historic labor reforms, and to enforce USMCA labor provisions where necessary. And something that was created that is critical here is it will receive and review submissions under the USMCA labor chapter and rapid response labor mechanisms. The rapid response labor mechanisms were implemented with USMCA. The facility-specific rapid response labor mechanisms in the USMCA establishes an entirely new streamlined approach to labor dispute settlements in free trade agreements, under which an ad hoc international dispute settlement panel can make a determination as to whether a specific facility is complying with local Mexican labor law. The RRLM allows for the US and Canada to request, based on a good faith belief, the remediation of a specific denial of rights under Mexican labor law occurring at a covered facility in Mexico. Mexico may also bring such claims, but against much more limited scope of US and Canadian facilities. So again, the focus is on Mexico to bring it up to par, quote unquote, to US and Canadian labor laws. And again, Mexico can do the similar things, but very limited scope. Under the RRLM's streamlined dispute process, the US and Canada can suspend preferential treatment, suspend liquidation and or block entry of goods from non-compliant facilities in as little as 120 days after initiating a dispute process. This is big. If there's a dispute and there's no resolution and there's non-compliance, the US and Canada have the right to suspend preferential treatment of USMCA goods. Mexican companies, particularly those in the aerospace, auto parts, cosmetic, industrial, baked products, steel, aluminum, glass, pottery, plastic, forgings, cement, and mining sectors are the most vulnerable and must be prepared to confront legal challenges related to the implementation of Mexican labor laws. And again, these have been put to test already. The first situation was in Tridonics. It was a plant in Matamoros, Mexico. This happened, in last year, 2021, and again, it had a major impact on the test of this labor issues. The AFL-CIO, the largest U.S. labor federation, filed a labor complaint alleging that for the past 2 years, Tridonics plant workers had not been allowed to organize with an independent union, Sindicato Nacional Independiente de Trabajadores de Industria y Servicio Movimiento 2032, SNIATS as acronym, in place of a company-controlled union or to ratify collective bargaining agreement. So this might get into politics, and I'm gonna stay away from that. But this union was promoted by people from Juarez that came down to Matamoros. This company had its own union, internal union, but they wanted this union wanted to take over this. So they went to the FAL-CIO, and they in turn they put the complaint with the U.S. Labor Labor Department, and this is how it got started. So what happened here? This happened in May. The petition was filed May 10, 2021. The rapid response mechanism was put in place on June 9th, 2021, and they resolved the issue in August 10, 2021. And here, what happened was the U.S. parent company of Tridonics in Matamoros, it's a Philadelphia company based, its name is Cardone Industries, and they agreed to recognize the workers' rights and pay back wages to laid off employees to settle the labor rights. So there were some layoffs because of this situation. So they agreed to pay them off, to pay whatever wages they didn't pay. And they also agreed to pay severance and 6 months of back pay to at least 154 people who the FAL-CIO said were wrongly dismissed from the plant over labor issues. This back pay totaled more than $600,000, or an average of $4,000 per worker. And the agreement also allowed for workers to select their own union representation, among other provisions. So they allow this new union to come and take over the workers. So this is how the mechanism, the rapid response mechanism works. Another situation was in Silao, General Motors Silao. Again, a confidential tip earlier, well, it was last year, 2021, alerted the U.S. Trade Representative and the U.S. Labor Department to potential violations of worker protection at the GM plant in Silao, Guanajuato, during the collective bargaining agreement voting. The U.S. government asked Mexico to investigate concerns over voter interference at the facility through the Mexican authorities, although the Mexican authorities had already begun probing concerns about the voting irregularities and media reports that the ballots had been destroyed. So there was a resolution agreement with this that was done that will permit workers at the plant to have a new opportunity to vote on a collective bargaining agreement by August 20, 2021. There were going to be inspectors, international observers, etc. So that the integrity of the voting will stand. Also, General Motors must also state its neutrality in the vote and implement a zero tolerance policy for retaliation. So the new voting took place on August 19, 2021, and the workers voted to scrap their collective contract, opening the door for to oust one of the most Mexican largest labor organizations under the union, under the New Deal, which is the CTM, Confederación de Mexican Workers, That's the oldest, biggest union, PRI, in Mexico. So they kicked them out. And during February 1st and 2nd, this year, new voting took place. And on February 15, the Center for Conciliation and Labor Registration, the Federal Center, certified the results with the National Independent Auto Workers Union, a union known by Spanish acronym as CINTIA, being formed. So CTM was kicked out and a new union was put in. Again, I don't want to get political, but this also has to do as well with getting rid of the old unions that were pro-PRI and pro-other parties to unions that are going to be more friendly to the new party in Mexico. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say. But again, these mechanisms have been tested, so here we are. Obviously, there are concerns, particularly in Mexico, regarding the labor chapter and the USMCA. As we can see, the United States will have the right of monitoring and ensuring that the labor chapter provisions are fully implemented, and this can be seen as a political interference. The labor chapter can also put pressure on wages in Mexico. I put in parentheses the automotive labor value content of $16 per hour. Obviously, part of the deal here with the labor chapter is to improve the quality of life of workers, which a big part of it is salary. So we can see that we're going to start seeing more increases in salary in Mexico. The aggressiveness of the implementation of the labor chapter might increase under the Biden administration because obviously, you know, they're Democrats, and the labor chapter was key for Democrats to vote for the USMCA. So maybe the Mexican government might be neutral in some ways, working around it by, you know, putting friendly unions to their party, that is currently in place. So this might impact mainly the industry by unionizing, you know, in different ways, and by putting pressure on labor issues and other areas. So again, you know, without getting political, we need to watch the labor chapter of USMCA as it can impact future investments and future relations, labor relations in Mexico. Another area that is interesting with USMCA is energy. Obviously, North American trade in energy products is significant and is growing. The USMCA provides a predictable framework for the United States, Mexico, and Canada to continue expanding this trade. There's an increase in exports. So this is good for the US energy and the US economy. Likewise, this growing trade will foster North America competitiveness and help lower our reliance on energy imports from outside the region. I'm going to have to go a little bit faster on this area so we can get into the supply chain issues. But again, you know, the USMCA energy provisions has zero tariff trade in energy products, locks in the Mexico historic energy reform. That's a question mark right there. Facilitates the movement of hydrocarbons by pipelines, certification requirements for oil and gas, streamlined regulatory process for LNG, liquefied natural gas exports to Mexico and Canada. So all these are provisions that the USMCA has to incentivize the energy sector. And again, you know, within USMCA, there's a couple of chapters of interest that mention about the sovereignty of Mexico. Chapter 8, Article 8.1, Mexico reserves its sovereign right to reform its constitution and its domestic legislation. And Mexico has the direct, inalienable, and unpredictable ownership of all hydrocarbons in the subsoil. Okay, so that's mentioned in the USMCA. But also Article 32.11 of Chapter 32 mentions that Mexico reserves the right to adopt or maintain measures with respect to a sector or subsector where Mexico has not taken specific reservation. But also Mexico has an obligation to continue application of trade and investment agreements that Mexico has ratified prior to entering into force of this agreement, including the World Trade Organization agreement, without regard to whether those agreements have entered into force. So yes, they can do certain things, but they have to grandfather and respect other things. And this has been the area of concern lately. Obviously, in 2013, before AMLO took power, Mexico amended its constitution to open its oil and gas sector to foreign and private investment. But so this opened up, and we saw a flood of investments, foreign investment into Mexico in the energy sector. But then when AMLO came into power, he started to implement a series of actions and measures to strengthen the national companies, the Pemex and the CFE, the Mexican state-owned power utility. And these developments have raised questions about the status of the energy reforms. So what happened to the energy reforms that were put in place? So they're implementing new things here, and these measures could have a disproportionate effect on the operations of private renewable energies. There was a letter that President Biden sent to and several members of Congress to AMLO on July 20, 2021. Obviously, I'm not going to read it, but it explains that there's major concerns about what's happening in Mexico. And the last paragraph here says, we ask that you address these violations when engaging in diplomatic discussions with President López Obrador. Well, this is to President Biden. This is necessary not only to establish a level of playing field of U.S. companies operating in Mexico, but also to allow for competition in the energy market that will protect American jobs and drive down consumer costs and greenhouse gas emissions. So again, Mexico is promoting Pemex and CFE, which is the oil and coal and the dirty energies, the not green energies. So there is a concern for the lack of interest in promotion of alternative green energies in Mexico. And it's reviving, it's putting a lot of money, the Mexican government's putting a lot of money into Pemex and CFE. Pemex lost $6.6 billion in the last quarter of 2021. And the CFE lost $4.68 billion in 2021. So these companies are losing money, but the Mexican government keeps investing in them. So that's a concern. Also, it's a concern about Pemex and Pemex, meaning their financial obligations in bonds and etc. So you just have to keep an eye on them. The other thing, obviously, it's even with Pemex and CFE, there are concerns of Mexico limiting contracts for oil and electricity projects to state-owned entities or a limited number of companies. Obviously, there are concerns that a lot of the contracts are given without going through a bidding process. And anyway, so there's a big concern. So this can negatively impact current and future foreign investments in Mexico in the energy sector. So we'll keep an eye on this, obviously. And you know, USMCA is up and going. It's working well from an operational standpoint. The biggest challenges that I see are the automotive sector, the labor sector, and the energy sectors. Obviously, both the labor and energy combined, there's also environmental issues as well, but those are within those two as well. But we just have to keep an eye on those and make sure that you know, we're informed of what's going on. I do foresee that there's going to be continuity for USMCA. These issues are just tests, so we'll just have to keep an eye on it. But it's overall, this has been a good thing for the three countries. So now I'm gonna switch to the supply chain disruptions and their impact on trade. Well, as we know, disruptions to the supply chain are not over yet. The Transportation Secretary of the United States is predicting that the supply chain issues facing the United States will continue well into 2022, and I will say next year. Last year, we will, at the earlier stage, we were saying, no, well, at the end of 2021, well, I think we're postponing this one over and over again. Citing, obviously, the demand as the top contributors. Obviously, we have economic growth, so consumption is there. So this is a big part of it. Some information here on the ports. Well, the Port of LA and Long Beach, they account for 40% of the shipping containers entering the US. So they are already operating 24/7 to provide some relief to the bottlenecks. But we have labor shortages and warehousing and transportation. So we, you know, obviously, and equipment limitations as well, as we know, containers, trucks, etc. So that's why we see these disruptions to continue. They say that they might not be as severe in the 2020 and part of 2021, because again, global manufacturing is open in general terms. And also another pattern that we're seeing is that consumers are getting somewhat used to delays. So a lot of consumers are pre-ordering stuff, knowing for a fact that they're not gonna be delivered until 12, 18 months. I tried to purchase a generator and the lead time to deliver was 48 months. Unbelievable, almost a year. But we have to deal with it. So people are kind of getting used to that. So that might allow for better planning from one side. So, as far as cost, well, in 2021, the supply chain disruption cost the world an average per country of 184 million, with the United States topping the list with an average of $228 million. Logistic bottlenecks are impacting 25% of global trade volumes. For example, in February of this year, there were 101 container ships idling offshore in the ports of LA and Long Beach alone. So there's this bottleneck backlog that we're having. Again, the good news is that the supply chain disruptions are estimated to level out by mid of this year. As inventory levels begin to normalize to pre-COVID levels, consumers begin to shift to sustainable consumption and shipping capacities begin to increase. Shipping capacities, obviously, we need containers, we need ships, we need trucks. Those are being ordered, but they're also being impacted by supply chain. And as we know, there's a lack of semiconductors and steel and other raw materials and labor. So the need or the supply of trucks and containers, it's also being delayed. And another big thing going on that happened recently, and again, this is daily, this is evolving, as we know, is what happened in the Canadian border with the truckers protesting and blocking the border. And they say that the economic impact of these blockades might be in the billions of dollars. This mainly impacted the automotive industry, but in a lot of other industries. And as we've seen, not just because of this blockade, but because of the supply chain disruptions, the automotive industry and many other industries which have relied on just-in-time methods, that's no longer, viable anymore. Now with everything that is happening, including COVID, the semiconductor shortages, geopolitical risk, now we have the Ukraine-Russian war, which that's a big concern because Ukraine, it's a key geographically located in Europe, and we might have issues in the supply chain, especially for those OEMs, automotive assemblers that want to supply Russia or have plants in Russia, and some components from Ukraine. And there's other events going on as well. Cybersecurity, cyber attacks. One of the top 5 forwarders in the world just recently got a cyber attack, and they're still down. So that is affecting the supply chain in customs transactions, booking of containers, air freight, etc. So cybersecurity is going to become a big issue, especially now with the Ukraine-Russian war. I don't know, we don't know what Russia's going to do. So that might, from a systems perspective, that might put a stop or slow down trade. So GIT is no longer working. So now companies are evaluating moving to the just-in-case GIC method, which basically means to increase material inventory levels to have available in case there's a major supply chain disruption. So having just-in-case, which we're already seeing here, at least in our region, obviously, having a just-in-case method of production might also continue to put pressures on supply chain disruptions, as an increase in raw material inventories might translate to additional transportation and logistic requirements. Freight, warehouse space, labor. I mean, there's not enough warehouse space around anymore because those warehouses are getting full by additional inventories and also by e-commerce products. We're having issues with labor, as we know. So being more competitive. Freight, there's not enough capacity out there. So, all these factors, inflation, that's another factor that we're seeing that is impacting all of us. So we will continue, with this being said, we will continue to see that trend of reshoring of companies and regionalization of the supplier base in order to minimize the strain that supply chains disruption created. But this will take time, but we will continue to see this. Now here, I do mention that Mexico will be key for reshoring and the regionalization of the supplier base. We're going to start seeing the shift of production into Mexico. Also, ocean containers vessels are looking to Mexican ports more than the U.S. ports, and also U.S. East Coast ports are being looked at more than West Coast ports. So it's a shifting of regional shifting of transportation and production that we're seeing. And here's some information that was presented by the Federal Reserve Bank last year. Supply chain disruptions is proving that we need more resilient supply chains. We need to monitor supply chains 24/7, source from different suppliers, map supplying suppliers, identify the tier 2, tier 1 suppliers for critical parts, work with sole source suppliers to develop alternate sources, and identify and monitor sub-tier suppliers. And there's also about the Harvard Business Review article on the Pan-American manufacturing ecosystems. Again, looking to regionalization in North America, Central America, South America, building reliable, cost-effective land-based transportation, going back to land, not ocean, not air, trucking through land. Obviously, the results are in jobs, promoting political stability. This might help in the immigration issue. So these are some of the things that we need to look at and to minimize the risk of supply chain disruptions. Globalization is becoming regionalization now, and rely on North American production, South American production. But we're going to continue to see these disruptions for the rest of this year at least. So just bear with it and monitor it and try to make the best out of it. Now, for the last part of my presentation, the current administration trade policy. And I have this here because I think this quote kind of sets the tone for the administration's policy. Trade policy should involve a laser focus on what improves wages and creates high-paying jobs rather than making the world safer for corporate investment. So from corporations, now we're looking at the actual workers, the mid-level people here. Regarding USMCA, obviously, the president has emphasized that we need to reduce dependence on Chinese manufacturing, especially certain goods that are national security, for example, PPEs. We want to bring supply chains to North America, in particular Mexico, rather than Chinese-based supply chains. With the push for electric vehicles, the USMCA provide incentives for automotive suppliers to relocate to North America and comply with, in order for the compliance with USMCA automotive rules of origin. So obviously, the current administration is pro-USMCA and they want to promote it, they want to foster it. Obviously, we have the disputes that we mentioned earlier, but hopefully those will be resolved. What's going on with other trade remedies? Well, regarding Section 301, we don't expect for them to be removed, obviously, at least in 2022. The approach of the administration is different than Trump's, but still with the same focus or the same result, or expecting the same results. So we don't see that happening. We might see the exclusion process to begin sometime this year so that companies can apply and exclude some of their commodities from the Section 301 tariffs. There's also a court case questioning the legality of applying Section 301, and they're questioning the list 3 and 4A of the tariffs. We still don't know what's going to happen there. There's a possibility that they might remove some and reduce some of the tariffs, but we'll see that. Obviously, there's no phase 2 agreement with China anytime soon. In regards to other trade remedies, well, Section 232 and Section 201 and Section 301, the European Union, we don't anticipate major changes. Obviously, there are some quotas that were open for European steel and aluminum. But other than that, we don't see major changes in these trade remedies, and we don't foresee any new trade remedies being implemented in the near future. So at least this going to stay static to some extent. But the big thing with the current administration is the forced labor. And this even started with the Trump administration. It's prohibiting the importation of goods made from forced or indentured labor, including forced child labor. And obviously this being enforced by CBP. So they are doing what they call withhold release orders on importers. We have a main area from China, the Xinjiang region, but we also already have cases open for tomatoes from Mexico. So we can expect the Biden administration to continue this closer towards China and the world. And we're going to see increased enforcement by CBP. So this will provide even further incentive for importers and other supply chains to increase their visibility deeper in the supply chain. Some statistics on forced labor, the withhold release orders, fiscal year 2020, there were 13, 2021, there were 7, but look at the number of shipments being detained. This is more on the enforcement side. They only detained 324 shipments in fiscal year 2020 compared to 1,461 shipments in 2021. And the value of the goods, 55.5 million in 2020 versus 486 million in 2021. So the enforcement is increasing. And now Congress passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, UFLPA, which provides customs the authority of enforcement to combat forced labor. So effective June 21st, 2022, this law creates a rebuttable presumption that any work performed in China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is presumed to be forced. And as a result, all types of goods from any country that might have raw materials, components, subcomponents made or some type of processing in the yard will be banned. And recommendation here, obviously that's why I mentioned forced labor here. That's a key area for the trade policy for this administration. To avoid potential lengthy detentions of merchandise and prepare for CBP's enforcement, importers should update their practices, procedures, and documents to address forced labor, map supply chains, and educate partners on record keeping to support the origin of goods, materials, and processing. So on top of the supply chain issues from the availability, cost, timeliness, and all that, we now have to look into the forced labor issue as part of your supply chain analysis. Okay, so this is going to be critical. Another area, it's e-commerce. Like I mentioned earlier, we've seen an increase in transactions in e-commerce, and it's because of the pandemic and how we're shifting from the consumer purchases. So obviously there's concerns about the criminality, including the importation of counterfeit and pirate goods, illegal drugs, etc. So customs is continually working to increase and improve the monitoring of e-commerce to ensure that they're legitimate trade. Also, e-commerce is a big contributing factor for supply chain issues now and in the future, as we see that consumers, we're going to increase buying online pretty much. So that's another key area that we have to look at. As far as legislative actions under the current trade administration, well, just recently, the House of Representatives approved the America Competes Act, which includes a wide range of trade-related provisions that could have a significant impact on the trade community. It contains provisions for trade, supply chain, shipping, forced labor, China, foreign investments, semiconductors, among others. Right now, the bill is currently in the Senate under review, so we expect action on this later on this year. How it affects trade? Well, it probably will reauthorize and update the eligibility for General Assistance of Preference, GSP, which is a special program that allows duty-free importation of certain products from developing countries. Also will reauthorize the miscellaneous trade bill, the MTB, for 2 more cycles. There are certain commodities under Chapter 99 that if they meet certain conditions, they can be imported duty-free or at a reduced rate for certain periods of time. Prohibited goods from countries are about non-market economies and USTR's priority list for IPR, intellectual property rights, from benefiting the de minimis tariff and entry treatment. So the minimis, the $100 threshold, products from non-market economies, They might not be imported. So this might have an impact on Section 301, because right now, if you're importing something from China that is under $800 under the de minimis rule, Section 301 tariffs do not apply. If this is approved, then Section 301 tariffs will apply regardless of value. Also, it will authorize the collection of more data from customs on de minimis shipments. It also impacts the anti-dumping countervailing, monitor more the movement of countries to avoid this countervailing duties. Also, the application of countervailing duties to subsidies provided by a government to a company operating in a different country, and also improving the process and timelines of orders intervention for anti-dumping and countervailing. So it impacts GSP, MTV, the minimis, and anti-dumping countervailing duties. Supply chains, well, this is a big area. There will be an office within the Department of Commerce to strengthen the supply chains of critical goods, authorize monies for to support supply chain resilience and the manufacturing of critical goods, industrial equipment, etc. in the U.S., authorize funds to establish domestic solar manufacturing supply chains to reduce reliance on China, establish monies to enhance medical supply chain elasticity and maintain domestic reserves on critical medical supplies, require a 30-day time limited study on the major current choke points in the supply chain, and authorizes the expansion of the MEP partnership program, including to address the resilience of domestic supply chain. So now the US government is looking into the supply chain and really putting formality to ensure that we don't go through the issues that we're going through right now again. So these are some of the contents of the American Competes Act. Again, it's under the Senate right now. We'll see what happens later on this year. And that's all I have for me. So I'm gonna turn it out to Flor, Torres, and Javier from CIC, and hopefully later on we'll have some Q&A. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so they can share theirs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. We're going to start sharing our screen. Well, good morning to all attendees. My name is Javier Sanchez, and I am part of the firm CIC, which is a company that helps to reduce the risk and operating cost for the AMEX operations in Mexico in regards to their foreign trade and customs transactions. This is through our customs and audit and compliance services. It is important to mention that starting from this topic, the presentation will be in English and Spanish. Without further ado, I give the floor to Mrs. Flor Torres, CIC's Executive Director. Flor?
Yes, thank you. Let me 1 minute. We have some problems with the presentation. Okay, ready. Sorry. Perdón. Muy buenos días a todos. Agradecemos nuevamente esta oportunidad para hablar sobre un tema muy importante para México, que es la nueva estructura para la administración de las aduanas en el país. Es decir, en México entró en vigor la Agencia Nacional de Aduanas de México, denominada ANAM, por las razones de llevar un mayor control de todas las mercancías que se importan y se exportan a través de nuestras 49 aduanas. Que en este momento el gran cambio es que ahora son controladas por las Fuerzas Armadas. Y obviamente esto está significando una gran transición. Esto es a raíz de la entrada en vigor de la ANAM. Y este órgano es un órgano administrativo totalmente desconcentrado de la Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público. Es decir, es un organismo al mismo nivel del SAT. Y esto es con el objetivo de frenar el contrabando de mercancías, tráfico de drogas, la evasión fiscal, así como de limpiar todas las aduanas del país. Y bueno, el presidente se refiere mucho a limpiar, pero está haciendo una reestructura, pues realmente en todo, ¿verdad? Tanto en personal como en materia de actualización de leyes, como en materia de trámites que realizamos todos los días los operadores de comercio exterior en México, sobre todo la industria maquiladora. Y también más adelante lo vamos a ver, la manera en la que a partir de enero vamos a tener que estarle reportando a estas dos autoridades la información que se genere, no solamente del área de comercio exterior y de aduanas, sino también de los impuestos internos que genera la industria maquiladora.
Thank you, Flor. We're going to start this topic by explaining the reasons as to why the ANAM was founded. Let me start by saying that currently there are 49 customs sites in Mexico that are now controlled by the structural change that came into effect on January 1st, 2022, with the creation of the ANAM. The objective of this change is to stop the smuggling of goods, drug trafficking, tax evasion, as well as cleaning all customs in the country. The ANAM, which is the National Customs Agency of Mexico, has technical, operational, and management authority.
El pasado 14 de julio de 2021, precisamente ya se le dio la formalidad a este cambio con la publicación en el Diario Oficial del decreto por el cual se crea la ANAM, es decir, la Agencia Nacional de Aduanas de México. Entonces, jurídicamente, esta agencia pues ya cuenta con todas las bases para poder operar en las 49 aduanas de México. El 21 de diciembre de 2021 fue publicado también en el Diario Oficial el decreto por el que se expide el reglamento interior de la Agencia Nacional de Aduanas de México y que entró en vigor el 1 de enero del 2020. Y esto fue muy importante porque en julio conocíamos que existiría una Agencia Nacional de Aduanas de México, sin tener mucho más información, sino hasta el 21 de diciembre, con el contenido del reglamento interior, pudimos tener mayor información de hacia dónde iba enfocada esta nueva agencia. Y en este mismo documento deja muy en claro que la ANAM tiene autonomía técnica, operativa y de gestión en todo el ámbito en materia aduanera, pero también, muy importante decirlo, también en la parte fiscal. y con ello le da forma, le da fuerza y norma a la nueva autoridad aduanera mexicana.
Thanks, Flor. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the timeline regarding the National Customs Agency of Mexico. Let me tell you that it was created on July 14, 2021, and on December 21, the internal regulations were published, basically specifying that they will enter into force on January 1st, 2022.
Ahora bien, es muy importante, a partir de conocer este reglamento interior de la ANAM, tener muy en claro para todos los operadores de comercio exterior, desde industria maquiladora, tomadores de decisiones, administradores de finanzas, de comercio exterior, operadores, agentes aduanales, es decir, todos los que estamos involucrados en la operación de la importación y exportación de mercancías, es muy importante entender cuáles son las facultades y funciones que tiene la ANAM y cuáles tiene el SAT, porque vuelvo a insistir, con este cambio, los dos órganos quedan en el mismo nivel dentro de las instituciones en México. Entonces voy a tratar de ser muy clara para que quede entendido. Hablando primero del SAT, el SAT va a continuar con todo lo que se refiere a la recaudación, a la fiscalización de los impuestos sobre la renta, del valor agregado, del IEPS, es decir, de todos los impuestos internos. Y la ANAM se encargará de la recaudación de los impuestos generales de importación y de exportación, así como del derecho de trámite aduanero, el que conocemos como el DTA. Entonces, si lo queremos ver en términos generales, el SAT estará enfocado a los impuestos internos y la ANAM estará enfocada a los impuestos generados por el comercio exterior del país. El SAT continuará con las revisiones de las operaciones de comercio exterior fuera de la aduana, y eso es muy importante enfatizarlo. Post aduana, el SAT podrá seguir haciendo sus visitas domiciliarias, sus visitas de inspección y todas las facultades que tiene para verificar el cumplimiento de las leyes fiscales derivadas de actos de comercio exterior. Y la ANAM, pues, estará a cargo de la dirección, organización y funcionamiento de los servicios aduanales e inspección. Es decir, la ANAM se quedará con toda la supervisión y dirección y control de lo que suceda en el despacho de las mercancías. Entonces, ahí vemos el enfoque que tiene cada una de las instituciones. Ambas recaudatorias, pero unas durante el proceso del despacho, la ANAM, y el SAT posterior al despacho de las mercancías. El SAT también tiene la facultad de emitir los criterios de interpretación jurídica sobre las leyes fiscales y también las leyes de comercio exterior. Y eso, insisto, muy importante entenderlo, que finalmente ambas instituciones están correlacionadas y facultadas para revisar impuestos desde diferente enfoque, pero esto no significa que la ANAM solo lo podrá hacer de comercio exterior y el SAT solamente del área fiscal, no. Aquí estamos, la diferenciación está en los impuestos internos y en los impuestos derivados del comercio exterior. Por ello, en el último bullet de la ANAM nos explica que se encargará de aplicar y asegurar el cumplimiento de las normas jurídicas que regulan la entrada y la salida de mercancías a territorio nacional. Es decir, el SAT emite los criterios, desarrolla la norma jurídica, las leyes fiscales, las reglas de comercio exterior, y la NAM es quien las ejecuta y verifica su cumplimiento. Entonces, muy importante, estamos en una etapa de transición. Poco a poco vamos comprendiendo este cambio, que es un cambio histórico en México. Y bueno, de esa manera, pues vamos implementando los cambios en la operación diaria y también comprendiendo cómo la autoridad, a partir de enero, va a solicitarle a las empresas que demuestren el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones fiscales y aduaneras.
Thank you, Flor. Well, just as Mrs. Flor mentions in the current slide, and in general terms, it is important to differentiate the functions that ANAM and SAT will be carrying out. For example, the SAT will continue with the collection and auditing of taxes on income, value added, special on production and services on new automobiles, with the review of foreign trade operations outside customs to verify compliance with tax laws and to issue legal interpretation criteria on tax laws and general foreign trade rules. ANAM will be in charge of the collection of general import and export taxes, as well as the customs processing fee, with the direction, organization, and operation of customs and inspection services, and finally, with the implementation and assurance of legal compliance regulating the entry and exit of goods in or out national territory.
Es muy importante tomar conciencia que para que la NAM funcione legalmente, es necesaria la modificación aún de instrumentos jurídicos que no se han modificado. Es decir, falta todavía armonización en las leyes, como es en la ley aduanera, reglamentos, reglas, el sistema normativo básicamente mexicano, formatos, trámites, están ahorita en la transición de los sistemas de la AGACE a la NAM o al SAT. Es decir, es muy importante tener presente que estamos viviendo una etapa compleja de transición en términos de aduanas en México. Y lo que anteriormente ya teníamos conocimiento de cómo realizarlo y cómo llegar a no tener o mitigar más bien riesgos y sanciones, en este momento, pues bueno, estamos teniendo que volver a verificar los procesos para evitar, ¿verdad?, multas, sanciones a las empresas con programa IMEX. Sin embargo, todo va sobre la marcha y bueno, hasta este momento se ha podido realizar una buena implementación de todos estos procesos. Uno de los mayores retos y que sí nos ha causado preocupación a toda la comunidad de comercio exterior en México es si los miembros del ejército tienen el conocimiento y la experiencia necesaria para tomar las decisiones fiscales y aduaneras. Recuerden que al inicio explicamos que las 49 aduanas del país han sido tomadas por las fuerzas del ejército. Y bueno, ahora el reto es, creemos, capacitar a todos esos servidores públicos que han estado enfocados por años a la parte de seguridad, pero y ahora estarán enfocados a la parte de decisiones aduaneras y fiscales que sean debidamente capacitados para que nos puedan realmente ayudar y facilitar todos los procesos aduanales que tenemos en México y que por ende impactan también la aduana de Estados Unidos. Entonces, ese será uno de los grandes retos.
Thank you, Flor. Well, it is necessary that Mexican regulatory system is duly harmonized with the ANAM, other laws, rules, etc. However, one of the really biggest challenges is that the members of the Army have the necessary knowledge to carry out customs functions. As you all know, the Army in Mexico has the responsibility to manage all customs in the country.
Y para entender lo anterior, existen 4 áreas básicas que pues son la base de las cuales se desprende todo este cambio. La primera es que la NAM ya la tenemos que ver, porque así es y así está constituida, como un órgano administrativo desconcentrado de la Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público. Que la NAM tiene total autonomía técnica, operativa, administrativa y de gestión. Es decir, no depende de ninguna otra institución en México. Tiene carácter, y esto muy importante, no solamente de autoridad aduanera, porque en un inicio así lo entendimos, no, tiene carácter de autoridad fiscal y aduanera. Entonces, pues eso es muy importante, y lo que hemos dicho o hemos mencionado en todas las pláticas que hacemos es que cada vez más el área de aduanas está relacionada con el área fiscal. Entonces, hay que verlo ya como un todo. Además de que la NAM cuenta con todas las facultades para emitir resoluciones en el ámbito que le fue asignado. Es decir, puede realizar cualquier facultad de comprobación que el SAT le haya asignado.
We're just gonna mention 4 of the basic ANAM properties. The first one, it is a decentralized administrative body of the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit. Its autonomy is technical, operational, administrative, and managerial. It acts as tax and customs authority. And finally, it is empowered to issue resolutions in the area in which it was assigned its field of competence.
Aquí podemos observar, y es muy importante porque es nuevo para todos, el artículo 3 del reglamento interior de la NAM, donde se determina o se da a conocer las funciones que tiene a su cargo. No las voy a leer uno por uno, voy a enfatizar algunas, pero es muy importante ver la primera, que es recaudar el importe de los ingresos federales aduaneros de acuerdo a la legislación aplicable y conforme a los tratados internacionales los cuales tenga México. También muy importante solicitar la información de los padrones de importadores de sectores específicos y exportadores sectoriales. Este es un punto sensible para las empresas y que, bueno, normalmente, pues bueno, es todo un proceso, la obtención del padrón, mantenerlo y estar en cumplimiento con el mismo. También me gustaría mencionar la cuestión de solicitar y proporcionar a otras instituciones públicas nacionales o del extranjero el acceso a la información necesaria para evitar la evasión. Ahí realmente muy, pero muy interesante, o sea, y la vuelvo a repetir, solicitar y proporcionar a otras instancias o instituciones públicas nacionales o del extranjero el acceso a la información necesaria para evitar la evasión o elusión fiscal en materia aduanera y otros ilícitos o infracciones de conformidad con las leyes y tratados internacionales en materia aduanera. ¿Qué quiere esto decir? Que bueno, pues van a estar, ahora sí hay un órgano encargado dentro de la estructura aduanera mexicana para estar proporcionando información acerca de los contribuyentes en México relacionados con Estados Unidos o cualquier otro país del mundo y viceversa. Entonces también esto se pone muy interesante. Y bueno, también nos habla de la facultad que tiene para efectos del Código Fiscal de la Federación, quizá, insistimos, la parte fiscal y obviamente la parte aduanera.
Thank you, Flor. In regard to ANAM 16 functions, I will be focusing in the ones that we consider the most strategic, starting with the first one. Collect federal customs revenues in accordance with the applicable legislation and in compliance with the international treaties in which Mexico is a party. The number 5 also, to determine and liquidate federal and customs revenues. The number 7, which is to request and provide other national or foreign public agencies and institutions with access to the necessary information to prevent tax evasion or avoidance in customs matters and other illegal acts or infractions in accordance with laws and international treaties on customs matters. The number 8, which is to monitor and ensure due compliance with the customs provisions related to the entry or exit of goods in or out national territory, and, as the case may be, to exercise the powers of verification provided for in such provisions. Also, the number 14, which is to share with the Tax Administration Service, which is the SAT, the necessary information for the correct administration, collection, and accounting of federal contributions and their accessories related to import and export of goods. Thank you.
Wow, muy complejo. Y para seguir con este tema, también es necesario comprender pues cómo quedó estructurado el sistema aduanero mexicano, las 49 aduanas. Y aquí lo estamos viendo en 3 brackets. El primero, esa es una información indicativa y que me parece muy interesante. El primero es las aduanas terrestres fronterizas que se han asignado, las aduanas marítimas y las aduanas interiores, que ahora les llamaron las aduanas terrestres no fronterizas. En azul vamos a encontrar, si sumamos, vamos a encontrar 50, no 49, pero es por la transición del Aeropuerto Internacional de la Ciudad de México y el Aeropuerto Internacional Felipe Ángeles, que todavía no está en funciones. Entonces, por eso vamos a contar 50, pero son 49 las que se encuentran en función y en transición las que se encuentran en ambos aeropuertos. Pero bueno, de esta manera podemos ubicar de una forma muy sencilla el catálogo de las aduanas en México.
This slide, you can take a look at the general picture of the 49 Mexican customs system, which basically is composed of borderland, sea, and interior customs. As Mrs. Flor mentions, if you start counting each of these customs, there are 50 in total, not 49. And this is because the Felipe Ángeles International Airport Customs is in transition. That's the reason of the difference.
Justamente ayer, y bueno, creo que fue a muy oportuno tiempo, justamente ayer se estrenó el portal de la Agencia Nacional de Aduanas, porque anteriormente, realmente desde el 1 de enero nos estábamos preguntando, oye, ¿dónde consulto? ¿Dónde consulto la información necesaria sobre la agencia, sobre los trámites, sobre los módulos, sobre reglamentos, etcétera? Bueno, ayer justamente se dio a conocer, aquí dejamos la liga para empezarla a explorar, relacionarnos con la información, que es muy diferente a cómo la veníamos manejando anteriormente. Y bueno, pues ayer estuve navegándola y me pareció muy interesante y que contiene toda la información necesaria para efectos de realizar consultas.
Thank you, Flor. At this moment, the new National Customs Agency of Mexico internet portal is already available. So we suggest your import-export departments to take a look at the information that it is displaying it in order to get familiar with all the modules, documents, and information that it is in there.
Y bueno, pues a raíz de todo lo que hemos comentado, solamente información general sobre la NAM, la Agencia Nacional de Aduanas de México, pues nuestra recomendación a este momento es que la alta gerencia, los departamentos de compliance y los departamentos de import-export y también de finanzas estén atentos a toda esta transición que se está dando en el marco aduanero mexicano a razón de este cambio, que vuelvo a insistir, es un cambio histórico, es un cambio complejo y que, bueno, la autoridad aún no termina de implementar. Entonces, ustedes me preguntan cómo estamos trabajando día a día, conforme va saliendo la información, cómo la van generando. Hasta este punto, pues todavía tenemos muchas preguntas que necesitamos respuestas o por resolver por parte de la autoridad. Por ejemplo, el tema de la carta aporte, temas de visitas de inspección donde están realizando análisis de gran profundidad, trámites que se han quedado, vamos a decir, en stand-by, parados, detenidos, porque se iniciaron con una autoridad y en ese lapso se dio a conocer y entró en vigor la NAM y bueno, algunos trámites los están rechazando, otros los están validando. Es decir, realmente estamos viviendo una etapa, no quiero decir de incertidumbre, pero de transición. Y insisto, todos los días, si verificamos las publicaciones del diario oficial, todos los días tenemos publicaciones nuevas. Entonces, estamos trabajando con mucho estrés y bueno, todos en la misma línea de acción de mitigar riesgos para la industria. Y obviamente, si su empresa necesita asesoramiento sobre estos cambios o auditoría y sobre otros cambios y otros temas importantes como la certificación IVA-IEPS, como la certificación OEA, CITIPAD y todo lo relacionado con la industria maquiladora, pues estamos a sus órdenes.
Thank you, Flor. Well, just to end this part of the presentation, we exhort top executives, senior management, compliance, import-export departments, just to be aware of the transition that is taking place in the Mexican customs framework, about all the changes that are still being implemented. So if your company needs more information about this topic, I'm sharing my email. Thank you very much for your interest and attention to this very important matter.
Pues gracias, muchas gracias a todos. Jorge, no sé si quieres comentar algo.
Yes, again, thank you, Flor. Thank you, Javier, for your presentation. This change in Mexico with the new Mexican Customs Agency is very important. So that's why we wanted to bring it to your attention. We still have a few minutes left. So already there were a couple of questions, already answered them. There was one question that was put in the comments, so I couldn't answer it, but yeah, you need to put the questions in the Q&A. So I'm open to questions so that Flor and I can answer if you have any. The question is the presentation can be shared? Yeah, it will be shared. It will be published. It will be available in the website, and it will be shared as well. Yes, sure. Again, we had a lot of information, and obviously things have been evolving lately. So we try to cover as much as we could in the presentation, but again, just keep an eye on the global issues that we're going through right now. Obviously, USMCA is being challenged in different ways, but we see it that will continue. The supply chain, make sure that you look at your supply chain, be more focused on the forced labor issues. Okay. There's another question. With the increase in control of the USMCA and the Mexican authorities for foreign companies to expand operations in Mexico, the shelter model is very attractive to meet regulations from day one. Yeah, as you know, the shelter companies are companies that already have all the permits, import-export permits in place, and the systems and process in place. So yeah, I mean, shelter companies have been used for startup projects to bring one product, two product lines, and eventually evolve into a standalone operation. But you are correct. I will agree with this, that shelter companies will be better suited to be able to maneuver through all those changes. Steve, can you, you're putting a question in the chat. Can you go to the, okay, there's a question here in the chat from Steve Taylor. You're really seeing more investment in Reynosa as a result of supply chain disruption? Yes, obviously, with USMCA, with the changes in the automotive industry, with the pandemic and reshoring, yes, there are companies looking to move operations to Reynosa and other parts of Mexico. So we are seeing the shift of production from China and even other Asian countries to ensure that they meet the supply demands from their customers, from the market, North American market. There's a question, crossings. Based upon what you're seeing, is that a temporary, okay, numbers of Michigan? That's kind of a statistical question, Matt, so I'm trying to read. Well, I do see that there's a shift in Mexico production, and obviously the increase in trucking in our area has to do as well with produce, not only dry goods or components. So I think that this increase in border crossings will continue in the U.S.-Mexico border because of additional production shifted to Mexico, and also because of the produce industry. Okay. Anybody else has any questions or comments? Well, if not, thank you very much for your time. I hope this webinar was informational to you. I know there's some highly technical concepts that we discussed, but the presentation will be available for your review. And if there's any other questions, please feel free to share them with the McAllen Economic EDC, McAllen Economic Development, so that we can answer them later on. Again, thanks for your time and have a great day. Thank you very much.